Hey, we are two Star Wars nerds, and today we're going to be talking about why Darth Vader, specifically in the OT, is probably the greatest villain of all time.
Mm-hmm.
So let's jump right into it. Just forewarning, it's going to be impossible to not reach back into the prequels and expand into Clone Wars and Rebels and all of that, and even video games and books. But we're going to try and keep it just to the OT for this video as much as we possibly can. But just kicking things off, like what comes to mind when you're thinking about not only Vader as a villain, but the greatest villain of all time in comparison to the rest of Hollywood, the rest of cinema, the rest of literature, everything?
I'm thinking back to when I was a kid and when I saw Vader, and I thought he was so cool, but like obviously he was a bad guy and I didn't like that he was bad, but I just thought he was even as a kid, I thought he was a really well done villain, and he's so memorable. Like, I think most people in the world, whether they've seen Star Wars or not, if they saw a picture of Vader or if they saw him, they'd be like, oh, that's Darth Vader. Like, that's the impact that he's made, and it's for a reason. It's not like, oh, there's the crappy villain from that Star movie. Like, no, he made a powerful impact because he was such a perfect villain. And I think it does have to do with his backstory, and it has to do with where he ends up and just how human he actually is, even though he's behind a mask. They humanize him in such a beautiful way. But specifically in the OT, you just see how like ruthless he is, how evil he is, how he's so prideful, and there's this ego about him, and it's just everything that a villain should be. And obviously my favorite moment where he does not become a villain anymore is that moment with Luke, and there's that redemption. But just I think that's good for a villain too, because it shows that even the worst villain in the movie world, or I guess the best villain in the movie world, can be redeemed. So even that's kind of a cool perspective. But I think Vader's cool looking. I love the mask and the outfit. Obviously when I watched it, and when I just knew about the OT, I didn't understand why he was in it. I just thought he wanted to wear that to kind of look cool because I was a little kid. So I just thought he was trying to look evil, and I was like, you accomplished it with your mask and your weird breathing. Like, good for you. But then having the backstory makes him even a cooler villain. But yeah, just even when you see him, you're like, yeah, he's a little freaky.
Well, and even the stormtroopers around him would respond in a very unique way. Like, you see that there's a mystery about him. There is, like, you don't especially masks, you can't tell what he's thinking. You can't see his facial expressions. So you're trying to understand what's going on behind the mask.
Right.
You're trying to figure him out, and you can't. And his speech is so limited, not because of his vocabulary or anything, just because of he's a man of few words, and he's very deliberate with what he says.
Yes.
And so not only can you not read his facial expressions, he's not giving you much with his words, and his actions don't say much. So he's just this towering presence that's standing there
in all black.
Yeah, and it's especially when you have the contrast of the stormtroopers in all white, he stands out. And not only that, he's the only one with a lightsaber, and
a red lightsaber.
He has the Force. And so, like, you even see in A New Hope, when he first enters the rebel ship, you see the stormtroopers kind of like pull off to the side. They're like, let's get out of this guy's way. And in the novel too, it's even written that they were afraid. It's like, don't make eye contact with them. It's like, please don't look at me. Please don't look at me. And to even think about, there is this delegate, from Alderaan, this princess, and he chooses to basically arrest her, interrogate her, and he's force choking people to find her. You're right. Your introduction to him is like, this is a bad guy, but it's like, is he a robot? How did he end up in the suit? So
there's that mystery.
Exactly. All that stuff you see from the outside makes you wonder what's going on beneath that. And even like you said, down to his breathing is different.
Yeah.
And I think there's just something about Vader that you want to know more about him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the cards are close to the chest. You know, following kind of your thoughts, a thing that has always stood out to Vader to me is in A New Hope, you see that the Imperial officers don't really respect him. It's just kind of
So
mixed.
weird,
You have
yeah.
some who do and you have some who don't. And it's weird because when you step back into the prequels and you have Anakin and Palpatine and then Sidious and Vader and all this, you would think like Palpatine and Vader would be like the top two.
Right.
But instead you have Emperor Palpatine and Lord Vader, but Vader doesn't even get the respect as like a number 2.
Right.
And so he has to prove himself to these Imperial officers
Mm-hmm.
by choking them, and even Tarkin can like tell him what to do.
Right.
And so in A New Hope, that's where you start, but then by the time you get to Empire Strikes Back and you see him barking commands more and you see him more intense, and even the way he swings his lightsaber, and then by the time you get to Return of the Jedi, just his intensity just keeps growing as a villain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you see him take control of his surroundings.
Right.
So with this, what do you think the best portrayal as Vader as a villain is in 4, 5, and 6? Leave out Redemption because I know
Mm-hmm.
you want to go to Redemption.
But that's not, yeah.
When we're talking about him pre-Redemption as a villain, so
Mhm.
post Anakin on Mustafar, like where for you does Vader best show like that he's a villain? Maybe even like a moment, if you can think of one.
I think, and this may be weird, but I think it's just because it was my first introduction to him was just him in the beginning of A New Hope. Just see, because I remember the first time I saw him, and just I was like, you know, a little freaked out, but also intrigued, and just I guess how he carried himself, his confidence, his evilness. Just I was like, this guy's like the real deal. You don't want to mess with this guy. And then he's choking people, he's demanding information, like he's just all around is exactly what a perfect villain is, even I think in that moment.
And you know, I think that is so right. Just that first time you see him in A New Hope, it's wild.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think for me, when it comes down to it, it would be the string of moments with him torturing his daughter, torturing Leia. Granted, he didn't know that was his daughter, but torturing Leia and staying in the cell that she was being tortured in. I think also transitioning to the trench run on the Death Star,
Mm-hmm.
where he personally goes out and starts killing people.
Right.
And that was his intention. I'm killing everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And he was close to succeeding. But then when it continues after that, I think the next part is when he knows Luke is his son and he's trying to pull him to the dark side and just straight up cuts off his hand.
Yeah, that's messed up. That's
And
evil.
Thinking about Anakin and what he went through, and then for him to cut off his hand, you know, it was just like, dang, dude, like that is something a villain would do,
right.
you know. And so, you know, what we're actually going to do, we're going to put a pause on this because this can end up being like a 30-minute video just talking about Vader.
Yes.
But let us know in the comments if you agree and think that Darth Vader is the greatest villain of all time. This was trying to be really myopic and just looking at the OT. But if you want something a little more, you know, we can go into the prequels and we can go into the cartoons and the books and we can really start to flesh this concept out. So if that's something you want, let us know too, because then we can just keep pouring out this kind of content.
And tell us your favorite Vader moment. We'd love to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with that, we are two Star Wars nerds, and may the Force be with you always.
Always.